Be wary of friends, they are more likely to betray you, because envy finds it easy to take hold. In addition, they quickly become spoiled and tyrannical. But summon a former enemy to your service, and he will be more loyal than a friend, because he has something to prove. Indeed, you should fear your friends more than your enemies. If you have no enemies, find a way to get some. In the middle of the 9th century, the young emperor, Michael III, ascended the throne of the Byzantine Empire. His mother, Empress Theodora, was exiled to a monastery, and her lover, Theoctistos, was killed. The conspiracy that removed Theodora from power and elevated Michael to the throne was led by Michael's uncle Bardos, a smart, cautious, and ambitious man. Michael, at that time a young and inexperienced ruler, was surrounded by intrigue, assassins, and squanderers of the treasury. In those dangerous times, he needed someone he could trust as an advisor, and he thought of Basil, his best friend. Basil had no experience in state affairs or politics. He was, in fact, the head of the imperial stables, but he had repeatedly proven his love and loyalty. To get a good enemy, choose a friend. He knows where to strike. They met several years earlier when Michael came to the stables and a wild horse suddenly bolted. Basil, a simple young groom from a peasant Macedonian family, saved Michael's life. The bravery and strength of the youth captivated Michael, who immediately elevated the common stable boy to the rank of stable master. Michael lavished gifts and honors on his friend, and soon they were inseparable. Basil was sent to study at the best educational institution in Byzantium, and the simple peasant became a cultured and refined courtier. Each time I make an appointment to a vacant position, I produce hundreds of people who are displeased and one who is ungrateful. Once he became emperor, Michael needed a faithful friend. Whom could he entrust with the position of court manager and chief advisor, if not the young man to whom he owed everything? Michael loved Basil as a brother and believed that he could be easily trained for new responsibilities. Despite advice to appoint the far more knowledgeable Bardos, Michael chose his friend. Basil learned well and soon was advising the emperor on all state affairs. The only problem was money. Basil was never satisfied. His desire to match the splendor of the Byzantine court made him greedy for the benefits power brought. Michael doubled and then tripled his salary. Then he ennobled him and married him off to his own mistress, Eudokia Ingarina. No course seemed too high to keep a loyal friend and good advisor, but troubles were just beginning. Bardas held the position of commander-in-chief, and Basil convinced Michael that Bardas's ambitions were excessive. Counting that he could control his nephew's actions, Bardas had helped him ascend the throne by means of a conspiracy, so he was likely to launch another conspiracy to overthrow Michael and take power. Basil whispered poison into Michael's ear until the emperor agreed to have Bardas killed. During grand equestrian games, Basil's men surrounded Bardas in the crowd, and he was stabbed in the back and killed. Soon, Basil asked to be appointed commander of the army in place of the dead Bardas, so that he could control the country and suppress rebellions. His request was granted. From then on, Basil's power and wealth grew without hindrance, and after several years, when Michael found himself in financial difficulty due to his own extravagance, he asked Basil to return some of the money given to him as loans over many years. Michael was astonished to hear Basil express refusal with a perfectly innocent expression. Only then did the emperor realize that the former stable boy possessed more money, influence in the army and the Senate, and ultimately more power than himself. A few weeks later, waking after a night of drinking, Michael found himself surrounded by soldiers. Basil oversaw the killing of the emperor. Then, proclaiming himself emperor, he rode through the streets of Byzantium astride a horse, brandishing a long spear topped with the head of his former benefactor and best friend. As for myself, I was once deceived by a man I loved boundlessly and in whose love I believed more than anyone else's. That is why I believe one can love and esteem someone above others, Serve them according to their merits and virtues. But one should not trust that seductive trap of friendship to such a degree that one falls into it. Michael III relied on the gratitude he believed Basil felt. Of course, Basil should have served him faithfully after all. He owed the emperor everything he had: wealth, education, status. As he rose in power, Basil received everything he wanted, and this solidified the bonds of friendship. The emperor realized his mistake only too late, when on that fateful day he saw Basil's brazen smile. He created a monster. He allowed someone who wanted more to close younger than the emperor, accustomed to receiving everything he desired, burdened by kindness and favors to approach. That person simply did what many in his position do: forget good treatment and imagine they achieve success entirely on their own. At the moment Michael understood the true state of affairs, he still could have saved his own life, but friendship and love blinded him. Nobody believes a friend can betray. Michael remained deluded until the day he found his head hoisted on a spear. God protect me from my friends. From my enemies I will look after myself. Many centuries after the fall of the Han dynasty into 22 CE, the history of China repeatedly witnessed the same pattern of brutal and bloody coups. Army factions agreed to kill a weak emperor, replacing him with a strong general, who then founded a new dynasty, crowning himself emperor. To secure his rule, he, of course, had to kill some of his military supporters. But after several years, the pattern repeated. New generals launched another conspiracy and killed him and his descendants. Being emperor of China meant being a lonely figure surrounded by a sea of enemies, the least powerful and most vulnerable person in the state. In 956, General Zhao Guangyan became emperor of the Song dynasty. He was aware that he would likely be killed within a year or two. How could he break the existing stereotype? Upon taking the throne, Zhao ordered a banquet to celebrate the new dynasty and invited the most powerful generals. After much wine had been drained, he kicked out the guards and all guests except the military leaders, who feared they would soon be killed. Instead he addressed them: "Every day I live in fear. There is no joy at feast, no rest at night. For which of you does not dream to ascend the throne? I do not doubt your loyalty, but if your subordinates, seeking power and wealth, force you in turn to put on the yellow robe of the emperor, how will you refuse?" The drunken generals, fearing for their lives, swore that they were guilty of nothing and were loyal. But Emperor Song reasoned differently. What could be better than life filled with peaceful pleasures, wealth, and honor? If you agree to relinquish your offices, I am prepared to grant you fine estates and magnificent palaces, where you may enjoy life in the company of musicians and beautiful companions. Astonished, the generals realized that instead of a life of anxiety and struggle, the emperor offered them wealth and security. The next day, they all submitted their resignations and retired to their estates with honor. With a single move, Zhao turned a pack of friendly wolves who would likely betray him into a flock of submissive lambs. Far from power, in the years that followed, Emperor Song continued his efforts to secure his reign. In 971, Prince Liu of southern Han surrendered after years of rebellion. To Liu's astonishment, the emperor offered him a position at the imperial court and invited him to the palace to seal their new alliance with wine. Accepting the cup, Liu hesitated, fearing poison might be in the wine. He groaned, "Your servant is certainly deserving of death for his crimes, and yet I beg your majesty's mercy. See, I dare not drink this wine." Emperor Song laughed and drank the wine himself, taking the cup from Liu's hands. There was no poison. From that moment on, Liu became his most loyal and devoted vassal. At that time, China was divided into many smaller kingdoms. When Shenzong, prince of one of them, was defeated, ministers advised the emperor to imprison the rebel. They presented documents showing that the prince still intended to plot against the emperor. However, when Shenzong stood before him, the emperor received him with honors. He handed the former prince a packet and instructed him to open it halfway home. Upon opening it on his return, Shengzong discovered the papers incriminating him as a conspirator. He realized the emperor had known about his plans for an assassination, but chosen not to punish him. Such magnanimity disarmed him, and he too became one of Emperor Song's most loyal vassals. A Chinese proverb compares friends to the jaws and teeth of a dangerous animal. If you are not careful, they will bite and crush you. Emperor Song was familiar with the jaws that threatened him ever since he became ruler. The friendly ones in the military would have swallowed him whole, and if he survived, the friends in government would have dined on him. Emperor Song did not choose to measure strength with his friends. Instead, he bought off the generals with fine estates and kept them at a distance. This was far wiser than executing them, which would only prompt other military figures to avenge them. It was easier for the emperor to handle friends in the government. Most of them ended up meeting their end after accepting the famous cup of poison wine from his hand. Rather than relying on friends, Emperor Song gradually transformed enemies and opponents into his most reliable allies. While a friend consumed by envy continuously expected new favors, these former enemies expected nothing and they received everything. A man who escaped the gallows actually feels gratitude and will go to any lengths for his redeemer. Over time, former enemies became trusted friends of the emperor. As a result, he was able to break the dreadful cycle of coups, violence, and civil war, and the Song dynasty ruled China for more than 300 years. It is natural to seek help from friends when you need it. The world is a harsh place, and your friends often soften that harshness. In addition, you know them. Why rely on a stranger when a friend is nearby? The trouble is, you often do not know your friends as well as you think. Friends frequently agree with you simply to avoid conflict. They carefully conceal their unattractive traits and laugh crescendo at one another's jokes. Because honesty rarely strengthens friendship, you may never learn their true feelings. Friends will tell you they like your poetry, admire your fashion, and may truly feel that way, even often so, but all too often they do not. Many people believe that a wise ruler should, when circumstances allow, skillfully create enemies in order to defeat them and emerge in even greater glory. Frequently, rulers, especially new ones, come to realize that more devoted and useful to them are those they initially mistrusted. Pandolfo Petrucci, the ruler of Siena, governed his state relying much more on those he had earlier doubted than on all the rest. If you decide to hire a friend, you will gradually begin to discover traits they have until now concealed. Strangely enough, your good deed completely upsets the balance. People like to think they earn their luck. Reality can bring disappointment and bitterness. It turns out that your choice fell upon you because of friendship. That is to say, not based on merit. A crack becomes noticeable, a bit more bluntness in speech, occasional flashes of resentment and envy, and before you know it, the friendship ends. The more favors you bestow, and the more generosity you demonstrate to revive friendship, the less gratitude you will receive. We have a long and deep history of ingratitude. It has proven its power over centuries, which makes it simply astonishing that people continue to underestimate it. Better to be cautious. If you do not expect gratitude from friends, sincere gratitude will come as a pleasant surprise. Select to be out of kindness, and you will learn how wicked kindness can be. The difficulty in using or hiring friends lies in the fact that it inevitably limits your power. A friend is rarely the person best suited to help you. After all, knowledge and competence are far more important than feelings of friendship. Michael III literally had the person he needed under his nose, someone who would not have failed him and would not have destroyed him. That person was Bardos. All work situations require a certain distance between people. You are trying to work, not to be friends. Friendliness, genuine or feigned, only obscures that fact. The key to power, therefore, is the ability to judge who is best able to help advance your interests in any given circumstances. Befriend friends, but work with qualified and capable people. Your adversaries are an untapped gold mine that you must learn to exploit. When Charles Maurice de Talleyrand, Napoleon's foreign minister, decided in 1807 that his sovereign was leading France to ruin, and that time was working against him, he understood the danger of a conspiracy against the emperor. He needed a partner, a like-minded person who among his friends could he trust in such a matter. He chose Joseph Fouché, head of the secret police, his most despised enemy, the man who had even plotted his assassination. Talleyrand realized that their past hatred could create the emotional basis for reconciliation. He foresaw that Fouché, expecting nothing from him, would work to prove to Talleyrand that he had not been wrong to choose him. A person who wants something will move mountains for you. Finally, he knew that his relationship with Fouché would be based on mutual interest and would not become clouded by personal feelings. Although the conspirators failed to overthrow Napoleon, the alliance of such powerful and unexpected partners produced the most important results. Opposition to the emperor began to gradually expand. Talleyrand and Fouché formed a fruitful working union. Bromine, a great scholar of the Vedas and an excellent archer, met his old friend who had become king. The Bromine cried upon seeing the king, "Recognize me. I am your friend." The king looked at him with contempt, then explained, "Yes, we were friends before, but our friendship was based on the power we possessed. I befriended you, good Bromine, because it served my purpose. The poor cannot be friends with the wealthy, the foolish with the wise, the cowardly with the brave, old friend who needs one. To people of equal wealth and birth may make a pact of friendship or marriage, but not the wealthy and the poor. Old friend who needs one." Mahabharata, mid-1st millennium BCE. Whenever possible, endeavor to make peace with your enemies and find a way to enlist them in your service. As Lincoln said, you destroy an enemy by making him your friend. In 1971, during the Vietnam War, Henry Kissinger was the target of an unsuccessful kidnapping attempt. Among the conspirators were prominent anti-war activists, the Berry Brothers priests, 4 other Catholic priests, and 4 nuns. Kissinger privately, without informing the Secret Services, invited 3 of them to meet him on a Saturday morning. Having explained that he anticipated most US soldiers would be withdrawn from Vietnam by mid-1972, he simply charmed them. They presented him with buttons reading "Let's Kidnap Kissinger," and one of them became friends within 4 years. It was not a random act. Kissinger routinely worked with those who disagreed with him. According to his aides, they sometimes seemed to get along better with their opponents than with their friends. People are more willing to pay for evil than for good, because gratitude is a burden and revenge is a pleasure. If we have no enemies around us, we may grow complacent. A pursuing adversary sharpens our mind, helps us remain vigilant and focused. Therefore, it is sometimes better to leave an enemy as an enemy, without trying to turn him into your friend or ally. Mao Zedong regarded conflict situations as the foundation of his rise to power. In 1937, the Japanese invasion of China put a temporary halt to the civil war between Mao's communists and their nationalist enemies. Some communist leaders feared that the Japanese would destroy them, and they proposed giving the nationalists the responsibility to fight the occupiers, while communists used the time to regroup. Mao disagreed. What if the Japanese won and occupied China for a long time? Years without struggle could rust the communists, causing them to relax and making it harder to fight again. Active fighting against such an excellent enemy as the Japanese would be a perfect training opportunity for an untrained and miscellaneous army of communists. Mao's plan was implemented and worked. By the time the Japanese were finally driven out, the communists had gained battle experience, which helped them defeat the nationalists. Years later, a Japanese visitor attempted to apologize to Mao for Japan's invasion of China. Mao interrupted him. On the contrary, "I should thank you for that. Without a worthy adversary," he explained, "a person or collective cannot grow stronger."
Mao's strategy of continuous conflict includes several key components. The first is confidence in eventual victory after a long journey toward it. Never begin a struggle without being certain of your victory, just as Mao was certain the Japanese would eventually be defeated. The second is that, if you have no obvious enemies, sometimes you must designate a suitable one, even turning a friend into an enemy for that reason. Mao applied this tactic continuously in politics.
The third is that such enemies should be used to make your goals clearer to the public, presenting them as a fight between good and evil. Mao essentially provoked splits between China and the USSR and the United States. He believed that, without a clearly identified enemy, his people would lose their sense of what Chinese communists stood for. A definite enemy is a much stronger argument in your favor than any words. Never allow the presence of an adversary to unsettle you. It is much better to have one or two clear opponents than to be lost wondering whether you have enemies and who they are. A person in power welcomes conflict, using enemies to bolster his reputation as a strong fighter and rely upon in difficult times. A snake chased by hunters pleaded with a peasant to save her life. To hide her from pursuit, the peasant crouched down and let the snake crawl inside his clothing. But when the danger had passed and the peasant asked the snake to leave, she refused. Inside it was warm and safe. On the way home, the peasant encountered a heron. He approached the bird and quietly recounted what had happened. The heron told him to squat and bear down so that the snake would be expelled. When the snake's head appeared, the heron pecked it, dragged the entire snake out, and killed it. The peasant feared the snake's poison might remain in his entrails. The heron said it could be cured by boiling and eating 6 white birds. "You are a white bird," exclaimed the peasant, "so we will start with you." He seized the heron, put her in a sack, and carried her home. After pulling her out, he told his wife what had happened. "You amaze me," said the wife. "The bird did you a kindness, freeing you from the poison inside you, saved your life and threatened to kill and eat her." She immediately released the heron, and the heron flew away. But first she pecked the woman's eyes out. Moral: if you see water flowing uphill, it means someone has returned good with evil. Knowing what will happen if you stick your finger into a lion's mouth, you will avoid doing that. From a friend, you do not expect a trap, but should you take him into your service, an ungrateful friend will swallow you whole. Know how to use an enemy for your own benefit. Learn to grasp the sword, not by its sharp blade that will injure you, but by its handle that will let you defend yourself. A wise man will gain more from his enemies than a fool from his friends. Although it is generally better not to mix friendship with service, there are times when a friend turns out to be more useful than an enemy. A person in power, for example, often needs someone to do the dirty work, but to preserve his image, it is better for someone else to do it. Friends often do it better than anyone else, because their affection for him compels them to try their hardest. Another example: if for some reason things are not going as planned, designate a friend as a scapegoat. Such a fall of a favorite was always a favorite trick of kings and sovereigns. They blamed a close friend at court for their own mistakes, and no one thought to suspect they did so voluntarily. Of course, once you play that card, you lose the friend forever. Thus, it is better to pick someone near you, but not your closest circle, for the role of scapegoat. Finally, working with friends often blurs the boundaries and hierarchy necessary in a professional context. But if both partners understand and account for this danger, a friend can be used with great benefit and effectively. One just must not lose vigilance. Always watch for warning signs: emotional breakdowns, envy, ingratitude. There is nothing stable in the realm of power, and even your best friend can turn into your fiercest enemy. On the usefulness of our enemies. Once, when King Hieron was speaking with one of his enemies, the enemy pointed out in the most unflattering terms that Hieron had foul-smelling breath. Concerned, the good king returned home and reproached his wife. How is it that you never told me this?" The queen, a simple, chaste, and innocent woman, replied, "My lord, I thought that all men's breath was like that." Thus it becomes clear that we learn of obvious, noticeable flaws from our enemies more readily than from our friends or family.